They were the kind of couple you'd want to be friends with, young, adventurous, in love, and building the life of their dreams. But one morning in 2007, a fishing trip turned into a nightmare, and a picture-perfect home became a crime scene soaked in blood. What went wrong? Who pulled the trigger? And why would a neighbor try to hide the truth? Brian and Beverly Mark's story began like many others, a seemingly perfect romance that blossomed into a beautiful marriage. Their lives were filled with shared adventures, mutual admiration, and a deep, unwavering love. From their early college years, they became inseparable, exploring the world together and embarking on new experiences. Brian, with his daring spirit, indulged in rock climbing, surfing, and diving, always seeking the next thrilling challenge. Beverly, on the other hand, excelled in a wide array of activities. A gifted athlete, she was known for her prowess in baseball and track, and she also played the guitar effortlessly, delighting everyone around her with her infectious energy and charm. As time passed, Brian and Beverly's relationship became a beacon of joy and stability, admired by those who knew them. Their families warmly embraced their union, and it was clear to all that their bond was unshakable. They traveled the world, visited each other's families, and dreamt of a life full of possibilities. Despite their whirlwind romance, they took their time before settling down, prioritizing education and career. Brian embarked on a promising career in an industrial company, while Beverly, a multilingual talent, found success as a hotel administrator. In 2006, after years of building their careers and traveling the world together, the couple decided to get married. The wedding took place in a picturesque setting by the ocean, with close friends and family in attendance. It was an intimate celebration of love and commitment. They soon bought a beautiful home in the quiet town of Graham, Pennsylvania, nestled near a river and forest, the perfect place to start their family. Their future appeared as bright as the sky, filled with love, hope, and the promise of a peaceful life. However, this idyllic life would soon be shattered. What seemed like the perfect storybook romance turned into a nightmare. On November 17, 2007, Brian and Beverly's lives were brutally cut short, and the once serene home they had built together became the scene of a chilling crime. Their tragic deaths left a community in shock, and their families in devastation, as investigators began piecing together the disturbing events that had unfolded behind the closed doors of their home. In the coming sections, we will delve deeper into the investigation that followed, uncovering shocking twists and uncovering the dark secrets that would eventually lead authorities to the truth. But what happened that day? Who was behind this shocking act of violence? The answers lay ahead as we trace the mysterious events that forever changed the lives of those who knew Brian and Beverly. After the devastating loss of Brian and Beverly Mark, the investigation into their untimely deaths began to unfold, revealing chilling details that would leave the community and investigators stunned. The crime scene, discovered by Brian's friend Stephen, was the first step in piecing together what happened in that quiet home in Graham, Pennsylvania. As Stephen arrived at the Marks' house early on November 17, 2007, he was concerned after receiving no response to his repeated knocks. Assuming that his friend had simply overslept, Stephen waited in his car for a while before deciding to go ahead with his fishing plans. However, as the day wore on, Stephen's anxiety grew. Something didn't feel right, and after several more attempts to contact the couple, he returned to the house to check again. This time, when Stephen peered through the window, he saw an unsettling sight. There was something in the living room. His heart raced as he spotted two lifeless bodies partially covered by a blood-soaked blanket, prompting him to call emergency services immediately. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they made several key observations. First, there were no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, raising immediate questions. Inside, the victims, Brian and Beverly, were found with gunshot wounds. Each had been shot with precision, the wounds suggesting a targeted attack rather than a random act of violence. The investigators noted that there were no signs of a struggle. Both victims had been shot while still in their pajamas, which indicated that the crime had occurred early in the morning while they were still asleep. Forensic analysis quickly confirmed that both victims had been shot multiple times with a high-caliber weapon. Despite the violence of the crime, there was no evidence of a robbery. Personal belongings, including cell phones and cash, remained untouched. This immediately ruled out the possibility of a typical robbery gone raw. The calculated nature of the attack suggested that the assailant had acted with intent and deliberation, though the motive remained unclear. The investigation also revealed a disturbing clue. There was evidence of an attempted cleanup at the crime scene. Drag marks in the blood, blood smears on walls, and a plastic broom with dried blood on its bristles pointed to the assailant's attempt to wipe away evidence. This disorganized cleanup only served to increase the amount of evidence at the scene rather than remove it. Despite these efforts, forensic investigators were able to determine that a .22 caliber revolver had been used to commit the crime. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted to the neighbors, particularly Daniel, a man who lived across the street. His strange behavior and the suspicious timing of his interactions with the Marks were enough to raise red flags. However, the investigation into Daniel was far from straightforward, and what was initially believed to be a case of simple neighborly disputes soon began to reveal deeper, more sinister connections. The crime scene was only the beginning. The true story, hidden beneath layers of deception and psychopathy, would soon unfold, leading investigators down a dark path. What began as a tragic case of two beloved individuals losing their lives turned into a complex and disturbing puzzle that would take months to solve. And as the investigation moved forward, one question lingered: who was responsible for the deaths of Brian and Beverly Mark, and what could drive a person to commit such an atrocity? The answer, as it would soon become clear, was not something anyone could have predicted. As the case developed, authorities began to uncover more about the possible suspect, leading to shocking discoveries about the victim's neighbors. These new leads would uncover the dark past of someone much closer to the Marks than anyone had ever expected. The investigation was far from over. As the investigation into the murders of Brian and Beverly Mark deepened, suspicion began to fall on a neighbor, Daniel. At first glance, Daniel seemed like an unlikely suspect, just a quiet man who lived across the street. However, when authorities began piecing together the events surrounding the crime, a disturbing picture of Daniel's past and his interactions with the Marks began to emerge. Daniel had been known to the Marks, having occasionally interacted with them. What stood out, though, was a strange exchange between Daniel and the couple just days before the murders. Beverly's mother later recalled that her daughter had mentioned a few unsettling encounters with Daniel. He was known for his aggressive demeanor, especially after drinking. He had even been involved in a small conflict at a party hosted by Brian and Beverly. This was just the beginning of what seemed like an unhealthy, volatile relationship between Daniel and the couple. After the murder, investigators began looking into Daniel's background. What they discovered was not only troubling but also indicative of a man who was willing to act violently when things didn't go his way. Daniel had a criminal history that included multiple arrests, and his ties to certain shady activities in the community raised suspicions. His demeanor during the investigation was odd, often defensive and evasive. When questioned, Daniel claimed to have been sleeping through the night of the murders, but inconsistencies in his alibi soon began to surface. It wasn't just his behavior or criminal background that drew the attention of investigators. The timing of his interactions with the Marks was crucial. Investigators discovered that Daniel had visited Brian and Beverly's home on the morning of the murders, which raised serious doubts about his alibi. Additionally, the forensic evidence gathered from the scene, including fingerprints and a palm print found in blood, pointed toward a possible connection to Daniel. Despite these mounting suspicions, Daniel denied any involvement in the murders, offering a series of conflicting explanations. He claimed to have been unaware of what had transpired, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. Authorities continued to dig deeper into his life, and as they uncovered more, it became clear that Daniel's history of violence and troubling behavior made him a prime suspect in the deaths of Brian and Beverly. Yet, it wasn't until further investigation revealed a chilling detail about Daniel's past, his prior violent outbursts and his ability to manipulate others, that the full scope of his potential involvement became evident. His actions on the night of the murders, including his visit to the Marks' home and the strange behavior afterward, now appeared more than just coincidental. Daniel's past and present seemed to be intertwined in a way that made him appear to be a predator hiding in plain sight, and as the investigation continued, it became clear that Daniel was no stranger to criminal behavior. As more details about Daniel's role in the case came to light, the investigation shifted into high gear. In the next stages, investigators would uncover even darker aspects of Daniel's life and his connections to the crime. But the most pressing question remained: what could drive a seemingly ordinary neighbor to commit such a horrific crime? The answers were not far away, and they would take the investigation into uncharted, chilling territory. As the investigation continued, the role of Jennifer, Daniel's wife, became increasingly significant. Initially, Jennifer was seen as a supportive spouse, standing by her husband as the investigation into the brutal killings of Brian and Beverly Mark unfolded. However, it wasn't long before her involvement in the aftermath of the crime became undeniable. Jennifer's actions, especially in the days following the murders, raised serious questions about her knowledge of the crime and her complicity in the cover-up. Jennifer was no stranger to Daniel's criminal past. She had been aware of his history of violence and erratic behavior, which made her role in the events that followed even more suspicious. On the morning of the murders, after Daniel had brutally killed Brian and Beverly, he returned home, visibly shaken but strangely calm. It was then that Jennifer became an active participant in the cover-up. The couple's home became the site of a disturbing attempt to erase the evidence of the horrific crime. Jennifer, despite knowing what had happened, appeared unfazed by the brutality of the situation. Rather than alerting authorities or fleeing the scene, she assisted Daniel in cleaning up the crime scene. The two moved Beverly's lifeless body into the living room, placing it beside Brian's, and covered both with a blanket, seemingly trying to shield the gruesome scene from the outside world. Their efforts to cover up the murder were methodical, albeit ultimately unsuccessful. Jennifer suggested using a broom to clean up the bloody footprints that were left behind, and she wiped down surfaces in an attempt to remove any trace of the crime. Despite her attempts to remove fingerprints, a crucial handprint was left behind, leading investigators to eventually identify her role in the aftermath. Jennifer's actions were not only limited to the cleanup. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that she had been complicit in a deliberate effort to cover up the crime. She was aware of Daniel's mental state, yet she chose to assist him rather than seek help for the victims or contact authorities. Jennifer's willingness to help conceal the crime raised many questions about her own involvement and whether she had been an active participant in the planning and execution of the murder. The couple's attempt to dispose of the weapon used in the crime further highlighted the extent of the cover-up. They had thrown the .22 caliber revolver into a nearby river, but despite their efforts, the gun was never recovered. However, Jennifer's lack of remorse and her continuing support for Daniel raised suspicions that she might have been more than just a bystander. As the investigation moved forward, it became clear that Jennifer had not only failed to stop the murder but had actively participated in concealing the crime. Her role in the aftermath of the killings would ultimately lead to her conviction for tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to 1 year in prison, though the legal system seemed to view her actions as more of a passive complicity rather than direct involvement in the murder itself. Jennifer's actions left a lasting impact on the case, and as the investigation revealed more about Daniel's past, the connection between him and his wife became undeniable. What began as an unfortunate case of violence soon unraveled into a complex web of deceit and criminal behavior. As authorities continued to dig deeper into Jennifer's role, they began to understand the full extent of the cover-up and the tragic consequences it would have on everyone involved. In the next stages of the investigation, new revelations about the couple's life together would be uncovered, further complicating the narrative of the crime. The events surrounding Brian and Beverly's deaths, now more fully understood, would soon lead to the unearthing of even darker secrets about the couple's neighbors. After months of intense investigation, the breakthrough that the police had been desperately searching for finally arrived: Daniel's confession. The authorities had gathered mounting evidence, but they needed his direct admission to close the case and confirm their suspicions. Daniel, despite his earlier attempts to avoid questioning, eventually gave in under the pressure of relentless interrogation. It was late in the evening when Daniel was brought into the interrogation room for one last round of questioning. His demeanor had shifted significantly from the cold, distant figure who had earlier denied any involvement in the crime. The detectives, having carefully pieced together the details of the murders, now employed a strategy that focused on Daniel's emotional state. They asked him about his past, his relationship with Jennifer, and his psychological state leading up to the murders. Initially, Daniel remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. But after a prolonged silence, he finally spoke. His words were measured, and his voice faltered as he recounted the events. He admitted that the murders were not the result of a sudden fit of rage, but had been planned with a chilling calmness. He explained that the killing of Brian and Beverly had been a consequence of a long-standing feud. What started as a simple dispute had escalated into a violent and tragic series of events. The breakthrough came when Daniel detailed how he and Jennifer had initially considered running away together but had ultimately decided to eliminate the couple entirely. He described how Jennifer had helped him cover up the crime and how the two of them had tried to erase any trace of their involvement. The confession confirmed suspicions that Jennifer had been more than just a passive observer. She had actively participated in the aftermath of the murders. Daniel's confession provided crucial details about the crime scene, the methodical planning, and the way the couple had attempted to manipulate the investigation. His admission helped authorities understand the full extent of the crime and solidified their case against him. Yet, even in his confession, Daniel seemed to show little remorse. His words were clinical and detached, and he appeared more concerned with explaining his actions than expressing any regret for the deaths of Brian and Beverly. In the days that followed, Daniel's confession was verified through further evidence, including forensic analysis of the crime scene and the discovery of the murder weapon. The details he provided matched the evidence already collected, confirming that his account of the events was truthful. With the confession in hand, the police were able to officially charge Daniel and Jennifer with murder, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. Daniel's confession had not only brought closure to the case but had also provided the final piece of the puzzle that allowed authorities to connect all the dots. The case was far from over, though. As investigators continued to uncover the motivations behind the murders, they began to look deeper into the couple's history and the complex web of relationships and secrets that had led to such a tragic conclusion. The confessions would eventually lead to even more revelations, but for now, Daniel's admission was the turning point in the case, marking the beginning of the end for the investigation. As the investigation moved forward, new questions arose about the nature of the relationship between Daniel and Jennifer, the true motivations, and whether there were any other individuals involved in the crime. The police now had all the evidence they needed, but the deeper mysteries of the case were only beginning to unfold. The path ahead would reveal much more about the couple's lives and the twisted events that had led to such a tragic end. Unfortunately, I am unable to fulfill your request at the moment. If you'd like, I can provide a summary or alternative assistance. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The tragic case discussed in this article serves as a powerful reminder of the profound consequences of unchecked emotions and impulsive decisions. In reflecting on the events surrounding Daniel, Jennifer, and the cover-up, we are offered a glimpse into the darker side of human nature, where deceit, fear, and emotional turmoil can lead to catastrophic outcomes. However, it is in examining these events closely that we uncover crucial lessons, ones that are not only applicable to the individuals involved, but to all of us. At its core, this case highlights the importance of emotional intelligence and the necessity of self-reflection in moments of high stress. Daniel's initial decision to cover up his actions was, in part, driven by fear and guilt, emotions that clouded his judgment and pushed him further down a path of lies. Had he been more mindful of his emotional state and had the ability to respond thoughtfully, he might have avoided spiraling into a deeper crisis. This serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of emotional reactivity, where a single moment of rashness can shape the course of one's life, sometimes irrevocably. Furthermore, Jennifer's role in the case sheds light on the complexities of relationships, trust, and loyalty. While her actions might have been motivated by a desire to protect her family, her involvement in the cover-up ultimately led to more harm than good. This emphasizes the importance of transparency and open communication in all relationships. In difficult times, it is often the most challenging conversations that need to be had, and it is through these conversations that true resolution can be found. The case also offers valuable insights into the ways society views responsibility and justice. The legal system's handling of the case, as well as the public's reaction, exposes the complexities of human behavior under scrutiny. What becomes apparent is the role that societal expectations and personal accountability play in determining the outcomes of such events. The case urges us to reconsider our definitions of justice and how it should be applied, not only to the individuals involved but also to the broader community that is affected by their actions. In conclusion, the lessons learned from this tragic case extend far beyond the individuals involved. They challenge us to cultivate emotional awareness, practice self-reflection, and prioritize honesty and communication in all aspects of life. By doing so, we can not only avoid the pitfalls of emotional reactivity and dishonesty but also foster stronger, more resilient relationships and communities. While the road to healing may be long and fraught with challenges, it is only through these difficult lessons that we can hope to emerge wiser and more equipped to face the complexities of life's trials.